Welcome back to the Good Viral Podcast. Today we're going to explore another impactful cause. Did you know that whales can store up to 33 tons of carbon in their bodies? What if I told you that protecting these giants could help combat climate change? Today, we're joined by Jens Currie from the Pacific Whale Foundation to discuss the vital work being done to protect whales and dolphins across the Pacific. Our guest Jens will share the major threats these marine mammals face, like vessel collisions, noise pollution, and unsustainable tourism, and how whales play a crucial role in being a carbon sink. Jens will also be highlighting the research on Hawaii's endangered false killer whales and affect the plastic pollution on bottlenose dolphins. If you're passionate about ocean conservation or curious about ecosystem interconnectedness, you won't want to miss this episode. Learn how you can get involved through community science projects, adopting a marine mammal, or supporting responsible tourism. So, pun intended, let's dive in. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome to another episode of the Good Viral Podcast. We are super excited today because we have Jens from the Pacific Whale Foundation, and he's calling in from all the way over from Hawaii. So we got the whole world really represented here in all time zones. And I'm really excited about this episode because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to whales. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation about this. So Jens, please tell us a little bit about your organization, why it exists, and what our listeners can learn about what you're doing.
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. Great to be part of the conversation here. And so I do work for Pacific Whale, which is a nonprofit focused on research, education, and conservation efforts across the Pacific, largely focusing on whales and dolphins in those regions. And our organization is driven by a commitment to study humpback whales, dolphins, a variety of species in Hawaii, Australia, Ecuador, Chile, and Japan. Focus in those regions is really on long-term monitoring to identify trends and assess major threats in those regions. And in a lot of those places, we do have some of the longest running photo ID catalogs for various species, which we use to identify individuals over time and determine their life history traits over, in some cases, 40, 45 years. More specifically on the threat side, we're really looking at what threats whales and dolphins face today. And that's largely boiled down to vessel collisions, unsustainable tourism, fisheries interactions, marine pollution, and climate change. And so we're working at the forefront to not only preserve and protect those whales, but also the ecosystems that they rely on, because of course, they're all connected. And what we're doing is working to mitigate those threats through our programs by actively contributing to ongoing research findings that help lead to management impacts, that help lead to the recovery of certain populations or the reduction of certain impacts we might be seeing in a particular area. And then through our efforts, we seek not only to raise awareness, inspire actions. We're very stewardship-based and people-based, and we're hoping to foster a sense of responsibility among the researchers, among the public community, among the conservationists, among the activists. And we're hoping to work towards a sustainable future for everybody. So I think there's an opportunity for you listeners to be involved simply by being part of the solution, which can take many folds depending on where you are and what your interests are.
Thanks for sharing all that with us. There's one thing that I caught in there. I also saw this on your website, and I didn't really understand it very well. So when you talk about collisions, vessel collisions, can you explain that? So exactly what does that mean, and what's the problem there?
Yeah, and so in a lot of places, we have a high density of vessels and a high density of humpback whales. And so we have areas where you have overlap. And anytime you have overlap, you have the potential for a vessel to collide with a humpback whale. So this can take the extreme side of things where you have larger commercial ships, barges, container ships colliding with whales at higher speeds, can be lethal to the humpback whale. And then on the more minor side of things, you can have smaller recreational vessels coming in contact with those whales and, for example, causing them to be propped or cut with the props. Often these smaller collisions aren't lethal, but they're certainly impactful to the population. And, one of the most recent examples is the North Atlantic right whale that was struck by a smaller vessel and had some severe injuries to its head from the props. And so it's not just big vessels, it's also small vessels, and they all play a role in potentially impacting the populations through vessel collisions. And the severity depends on a lot of circumstances, but it's certainly a threat that is prominent and is not going to go away unless, the marine trade disappears overnight, which isn't really feasible in the economy today.
And I'm sorry to keep going down this path, but I'm just trying to imagine this. So what's the experience like for the whale itself then? Is the whales typically, are they just sort of doing what they do and they don't know? Or are they able to usually dodge the vessels? Or what is the experience like for these animals out there that are getting hit?
It ranges. We do see some avoidance tactics employed by the humpback whales. When I've seen it, oftentimes what we're dealing with is after the fact. And so we're looking at evidence of previous collision, whether it's the very signature mark of cuts along the body that can only happen from the propeller of a vessel, for example. And so we do see humpback whales that have these prop slices in their tails or their flukes. Now that would, of course, indicate they were diving or trying to get out of the way. Sometimes that's not the case, and the vessel catches them by surprise, and then the severity ranges from there depending on how big the whale is, how big the vessel is, how fast that vessel is going, and where exactly that vessel might have made contact. And so, yeah, I mean, they are aware of their surroundings, and if they have enough time to react, they will react, but sometimes they don't have enough time to react, or they are caught by surprise.
Sure.
Right.
Sure, yeah.
I thought it was interesting looking at your website and kind of learning a bit about these vessel collisions. A lot was talking about sound. And I honestly never really thought about sound affecting the behaviors of whales, dolphins, and such. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so acoustic impacts, as is referred to in the scientific community, is another field of study. And I will preface this that I'm no expert in the acoustic realm. However, it's certainly been a part of some of the research efforts we've been doing here. And so noise does travel much easier through liquid than it does through the air. And so you can imagine engines traveling at high speeds, emitting lots of noise, will have some sort of acoustic impact in the immediate area. And so it's really becoming a problem when that acoustic impact doesn't go away. So it's a constant impact for those whales in places where you have high shipping lanes, high concentration of those big barges, for example, delivering supplies on the East Coast. You have a high concentration and a constant impact from acoustic noise from those vessels. And it also becomes impactful if it's such a loud noise that it's actually causing a physiological change in those animals, whether it's causing them to dive faster than they're capable of doing, or whether it's physically damaging some of the internal hearing mechanisms of that individual. And so those are kind of the extreme scenarios with acoustics. Interestingly, when they did halt a lot of the vessel traffic off the East Coast, they did notice lower stress levels in some of the right whales over there as a result, or they attribute it to reduced vessel traffic during that time period. And so it does seem like there's some stress components there from those consistent, louder noises that can go away if the vessels cease to travel through a particular area. And so I'll posit at that. Again, I'm no expert in acoustics, but it's something to consider as well.
Yeah, because, I don't think a lot of people have seen, you can go online and Google this and you can kind of see the map of where all the ships are in the world, right? And you can just kind of see the chaos. To me, it looks like chaos. It's just like blind everywhere, all of these ships. And you're like, the ocean's very big. But at the same time, it's like, that is a lot of boat activity. And so I can't imagine that those amount of, especially carrier ships with all the products and such, is just like, they're massive, but also they're going all the time. So I never really quite thought about that. And then I just thought about that map and it's like, that is a lot of shipping activity. So of course it would make sense that it would affect animals that do rely on lots of pieces of sound for communicating and such. So yeah, thank you for telling us that.
And I guess, I'm kind of going on a tangent here maybe, but I suppose that the dolphins and whales are usually a lot of times in the same area that fishermen would be, right? And sort of sharing a lot of the same waters because that's where they would be eating, right? So it seems like just a lot of crossover. So what I'd like to ask you, and this is getting more specific to what you guys have been doing, is can you tell us a little bit about the impact that you guys have had, like in terms of maybe share a story with us or tell us something that's that stands out for you as something that's happened as a result of the work that you all are doing?
So at Pacific Whale Foundation, everything really does start with research and a research question. And so more recently, we've been focusing on using innovative techniques and latest technologies to really answer the pressing management questions. The specific story that comes to mind, direct impact we've had is a collaborative effort we've been doing with the marine mammal research program at the University of Hawaii, where we're exploring ways to better understand Hawaii's endangered population of false killer whales. It looks like the population is relatively stable over the last 10 years at around 100 individuals. However, it had this big decline, and that was largely attributed to depredation and hooking in longline fisheries. And so when I say depredation, I mean they're going after a line that's baited potentially for a tuna or a swordfish, and they're trying to eat that free lunch, if you will, and becoming caught. Various measures that have been put into place to reduce that threat today. However, a remaining question that connects to that is, what does it cost to be a false killer whale? When I say cost, I'm referring to what is the energetic cost. Are there sufficient resources in terms of prey to sustain and recover that population? And then this is important because there are various commercial and recreational fisheries targeting their prey base. So to get to your earlier question of overlap between fisheries and dolphins, they're not only potentially being impacted by being bycaught, for example, but they're also competing in some cases, like we see for false killer whales, for the exact same resources. So, the fish that you might get on a restaurant here in Maui is the same fish that could potentially feed a false killer whale out in the wild. And so to answer this question, we spent nearly 3 years trying to deploy what we call a CATS tag, which stands for Customized Animal Tracking Solutions. It's a suction cup tag, and we're trying to attach that to the endangered population. And only in 22 were we successfully able to do this. And with that deployment, we're able to look at the fine-scale movements and energetic expenditure of false killer whales. And this CATS tag allows us to really see in the dark, see when the animal is under the surface when we can't study it. We know the exact swim speeds it was doing. We know every time it came up to breathe. We know each fluke beat that it did. We know the number of dives and how deep they dove. And then we can link this to a camera feed that's also going at the same time, and then listen into the acoustic piece through onboard hydrophones. We're really able to get detailed information on the bioenergetics of this population. And we're trying to see what is the energy input, which is gained through foraging, and what is the energy output, which is, of course, used up through various activities, whether it's swimming, diving, things like that. And this successful deployment now means we can answer that question, which we couldn't before. And we can now look at whether the high energy costs of false killer whales is driving that need to depredate. So are they needing to take every opportunity to feed that they can? And that's why they have such a high bycatch rate. Or is there even sufficient prey resource left for them to consume, given the commercial and recreational fisheries are in a sense competing for that same resource? And of course, this all contributes to an enhanced understanding of false killer whales. And in this particular case, which is why it's impactful, it allows us to look at new conservation strategies that really have remained unexplored to date since the listing of that population.
Yeah, and you said a word in there that I think is a little bit important to educate our audience with, because I didn't know it when I went onto your website. Oh, yeah, maybe I have heard this before, but I didn't quite put it all together. Could you explain a little bit of what bycatch is and what are the many ways that could be in terms of what's happening to these whales?
Yeah. So bycatch in the broadest sense is unintentional catch of non-target species. So sharks can be bycatch, dolphins can be bycatch, turtles can be bycatch. And so in the sense of our research, when we're looking at humpback whales or dolphins, we're generally seeing that dolphins go after baited hooks and are inadvertently hooked in that way. So that's one form of bycatch. Or humpback whales, in some cases, they can be caught in larger seine nets, for example, or larger nets that are just kind of trawling through the ocean as well. And so there's a potential there for being bycaught as well.
I'm thinking about maybe the difference between somebody like, I don't know if you can see my little whale statue back here. And Anastasia mentioned that she loves whales, right? Earlier when we were talking, but
I am representing octopus today, but yes.
Nice. But for the average person out there, that's just sort of normal day-to-day life, that doesn't think about whales in their normal life or about dolphins or anything. What I'm wondering is, what's the reason that people, like a normal person that doesn't think of these as important animals or iconic animals, what's a reason that, in what ways you might say that they are connected to us, to our planet, to our lives? In other words, what are the roles that these animals have in the world, and why are they so important? Why should people care, in other words?
Couple examples I'll give, but I'll probably stick to the one that most of your listeners probably know about, which is, of course, humpback whales. Very iconic species. If you go whale watching in most places, you're going to be looking for humpback whales. And so there is a term called the whale pump, which talks about the nutrient cycling of the ocean and how humpback whales facilitate in that. And humpback whales undergo large migrations. Here in Hawaii, it's around 3 miles from Alaska to Hawaii. They undergo that migration once a year. And so they're feeding up in the nutrient-rich areas of Alaska, and then they're of course, defecating and therefore contributing to nutrients in that ocean up there. And then they're also capturing carbon as they live throughout their life cycle. So they're not only, fertilizers of the sea, if you will, producing nutrient for other smaller organisms to thrive. So think of zooplankton or plankton species, which of course feed fish species, which of course feed humans. And so they're part of that cycle that keeps the ocean thriving and keeps it going for various fisheries and for certain individuals that might choose to consume seafood. And at the same time, they're removing carbon from the atmosphere. And so in a time of need of carbon sequestering, humpback whales play an important role in that, similar to planting a tree. Save a humpback whale will kind of have a similar role in that.
Can you explain a little bit about how they help with the carbon sink, right? So you're saying that when they migrate, obviously they're leaving a trail. And so can you explain a bit about how that works with reducing carbon?
Yeah, so they are carbon sinks, which means they store carbon through consuming their food resource. And therefore, that's not going out in the environment. And so when a humpback whale dies, it sinks to the bottom. All the carbon that it's stored throughout its life cycle then remains in the ocean. It's moved on through other organisms, but it's not released out into the atmosphere.
How interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Right? You're just like, oh, feel interesting. So yeah, I like this. I like the symbology of like plant a tree, save a whale. I think that's definitely a t-shirt. So I think that would be really great. That's actually really cool imagery right there.
Quick one, everybody. If you're feeling inspired by Jens and the mission of the Pacific Whale Foundation, but are still asking yourself, what can I do to help? First up, consider donating time or funds to support their initiatives. You will find a link to their website in the description wherever you are listening or watching. Always the power of social media. Like, comment, and share this episode to spread awareness and inspiration so that others can take action. Every small change counts. Remember, together we can create massive and positive change. And as always, thank you for being part of the conversation. Now on to the rest of the episode for more inspiring stories from Jens.
So it was one thing I thought that was really cool that your foundation does in terms of some solutions to help educate people, especially. And, this is important, but also how you can get more involved. Says that you do a lot of eco-adventures is what you call them, but it's kind of ecotourism in a lot of ways. And that was one of your 5 threats. I think it was, just not sustainable tourism. So can you talk a little bit about what is unsustainable tourism in specific to whales and dolphins and such, and what it is that you guys do to make it a little different?
Sure. And so, start at the top of tourism is a good thing. I think it's important that when it's possible, people can experience responsibly nature, and in this case, whales and dolphins. However, it needs to be done in a way that's not going to impact the population that you're trying to educate folks about or get people excited about conserving. And so that's how I see tourism working well, driving for here at Pac Whale Eco Adventures. And at the same time, we do see non-responsible tour operators that could benefit from further guidance or further advice on how to effectively approach and watch humpback whales or dolphins that are going to not be as impactful or reduce the potential impact for behavioral change for that population, for example. And so here in Hawaii, we spent nearly 10 years looking at what is the safest way to transit in areas where there's high humpback whales and high vessel traffic, and we're able to come up with a recommended speed. We also looked at, if you want to approach a whale, what's the best way to do that? And to answer that question, we stood up on land and watched vessel operators come in for a whale watch to a humpback whale group, look at the behavior before, during, and after, and we're able to quantify how that vessel approached and left and how that did or did not impact whale behavior to come up with recommended guidelines. And so unsustainable tourism is usually tourism that wants to get people there close and get people there fast with very little thought to the impact that potentially has to the target animal or the target group. Sustainable tourism is looking at how can we get people connected to that particular animal or group, but do it in a way that they're observing its natural behavior and not causing any behavioral change or avoidance behaviors, which is particularly important in areas like Hawaii, where you have humpback whales coming here to breed and nurse. So you have moms nursing their calves. They only have a short amount of time to get calves strong enough to migrate back to Alaska. And so any disturbance or change in those behaviors could impact the survivability of that calf. And so it can quickly become from something that could be thought of as not too impactful to very impactful if you're disrupting the ability of a calf to nurse on a humpback whale's mom.
Right. And just real quick, so I thought it was very interesting and timely because for myself, I'm here in South Korea, and actually for my short vacation, I'm going to be going to the Philippines, and I'm getting my scuba certification, which I'm really excited about. While I'm there, they talk about doing whale shark diving. Right. And so it kind of got me thinking. I was like, oh, that is something to think about. So, you don't know what you don't know. So what are some things that we as an audience can do to make sure that these people that we're about to book a tour or to do something with that is actually sustainable?
Yeah, great question. And so, Pacific Whale Foundation's fortunately situated in an area where we can study the impacts of tourism on whale watching, for example, in multiple regions. And an example of that is looking at operations in Australia versus Hawaii. And one of the main things we determined was you need to have region-specific guidelines. And so guidelines that make sense for breeding and birthing humpback whales in Hawaii might not make sense for transiting or resting whales in Australia, for example. And there's also different forms of tourism. And so in Australia, they have swim with whales tourism. In Hawaii in the US, that's not allowed. And so it's not applicable. So the first step I would tell users, your audience, to do is look to see if they follow any kind of guidelines. Generally, if they're doing something, it's going to be on their website. It's going to be written somewhere. And if you can't find what they're doing, and that's responsible, then chances are they aren't doing anything and it's not a good choice. In an area where you have, species driving a need for tourism, meaning you have a high concentration of whale sharks, for example, you're going to have people that come take advantage of that for a financial gain, and then you have people that take advantage of that for an educational gain. And of course, the balance between financial and educational is where you have ecotourism. And so finding out what they're doing to minimize their potential impact is the first step. Their website, if not, I would suggest you ask them if that's a concern for you. Reach out to them and ask them what they're doing to ensure they're having minimal impact in their sustainable ecotourism company. And if none of those gets you a reply, then I would suggest err on the side of caution and avoid that particular tour operator. Unfortunately, today, there's no master list or website that just lists each organization that's good or bad. So it does require the consumer, in this case, the tourist, do a little bit of homework and seek out the responsible operators in the region.
As far as your organization, you guys have been around, you're doing a lot of different things, or you have done a lot of different things. Can you tell us a little bit about what you all are working on now that you're excited about, something that is very interesting and exciting that's happening at the moment for you guys?
I'm going to speak to, what I'm excited about, which is, one of over 20 researchers here at Pacific Whale Foundation, and I'm based in Maui. So I'm going to bring it right home here to Maui Nui and talk about bottlenose dolphins. And so in Maui Nui, we have a stock that's specific to the 4 islands that make up Maui Nui. And there's approximately 2 individuals in that population in the 90s. The latest abundance estimates have shown a drastic decline to around 65 individuals. And so anytime you see that drastic decline, it of course becomes a priority. And so for me, that really triggers innovation, excitement, and the need to really drive at what's causing this decline. And so our approach has been to look at 2 aspects of this. First is the potential impacts of plastic ingestion, and the second is the age, structure, and health of that population. Can either of those things explain the decline we're seeing? And of course, if we have an explanation for what we're seeing, we get to the next step, which is management and conservation measures put in place to reverse those trends. And so starting on that first point, plastic pollution, it's very prominent here in Hawaii. There's been quite a few studies led by Pacific Whale Foundation that show high rates of debris accumulation, both in the coastal areas and also on the nearshore areas. It's attributed to our proximity to the South Pacific Gyre or the Pacific Garbage Patch. And of course, that creates a threat for many marine mammals, including the bottlenose here. And so we're partnering with the Center for Marine Debris Research to look at the extent of plastic exposure in these bottlenose dolphins. And so we use a biopsy, which is a little skin and blubber plug we can sample using a crossbow and an arrow with a hollow tip. And we assess that blubber tissue for plastic additives. We link plastic additive exposure differences to physiological impacts of that animal. For example, is there a relationship between the ability of an animal to reproduce their hormones and the levels of plastic additives we see in tissue. And, that's going to be a key piece for the health of the population, knowing if that's having an impact. And even just knowing if they have high exposure levels to plastic additives. That's kind of the marine debris plastic additive piece. And the other part is looking at the age, structure, and health of the population. So we're using unoccupied aerial systems, or drones, as they're commonly called, to measure the size of these individuals. So we can fly over that animal and get the length and width measurements and be within about 2% accuracy of the actual length and width of those animals. So really precise measurements we can determine here. And what we're looking at is the age distribution of that population. And from that, we can see if the population is contracting, expanding, or stable. Ideally, what we want to see, of course, is a stable or expanding population. If we look at the declining trends, one would expect we're having a contracting population. And of course, that's going to be impactful and lead to the next question. And so oftentimes in science, the results from one research question leads to the next research question. And so we're kind of early on where we have identified a potential impact, which is a drastic decline of Maui population of bottlenose dolphins. And we're trying to figure out exactly why. Put the puzzle pieces together, see if we can get that answer to put in some mitigation and management measures to get those populations back up to, levels they were 20 years ago.
So I think that's so cool that you guys use drones. I think drones are some of the most interesting innovations that's happened in the last century. It's really helped progress in so many ways with science and such. So that's really cool that you guys use that. It makes sense as well. I have more of a personal question for you.
Sorry, I think it's cool you guys use crossbows. Excuse me. I want to try.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. That's pretty badass. Yeah. But it makes sense how you would harvest a sample. So a live sample, that's pretty cool. But no, this isn't a deep dive personal question, but it's more of just like, what got you interested in doing all of this? What was kind of that spark that got you to be like, I want to study whales and I want to study the behavior of whales, especially when it comes with human interaction and such. What sparked all that?
Yeah, I'd say, the initial spark for me wasn't whales and dolphins specifically. I'm a bit unique in that sense. In my field, I haven't had the desire to study whales and dolphins since I was a child. It was rather, something that came later on in life. And so my background is really in having a robust statistical foundation to study a variety of species and answer a variety of questions. It's only after I got the job at Pacific Whale Foundation that passion and experience honed into whales and dolphins. And today I can't see myself studying anything else. It's pretty rewarding to work with populations long term. So individuals, Pacific Whale Foundation has been studying for 40 years, meaning, people before me have photographed this particular humpback whale, for example, in the 1980s. We're seeing it again today. And in between that, we have a rich data set of that particular individual. And what's exciting for me going forward is if you have a 40-year data set, you have a good current baseline of what we expect individual and population health to look like. And we are in a time of extreme threats and stressors for those populations, and being able to leverage long-term data to look at direct impacts of things like climate change, fisheries interactions, unsustainable tourism, plastic pollution is really exciting because you can often see impacts very clearly and right away, and making sure that it doesn't stop in the scientific literature, not after you've published that findings or published that paper or given that presentation, rather taking it a level further and ensuring there's some kind of conservation action, some kind of management outcome that ensures that your research is applied in the way you want it to be, which is, of course, to conserve whales and dolphins. And it's that piece, that applied piece, that keeps me going and makes me excited.
So when our listeners are interested and they want to get involved in different ways, so besides obviously donating and contributing that way, in what ways can our listeners learn more, get more involved, be more active with what's happening to dolphins and whales?
Yeah, for sure. Our website's always a good place to start, pacificwhale.org. And then there's a little button on how you can help. And, again, we operate in Australia, Chile, Ecuador, Japan, and Hawaii. And so depending on where you are, there's different opportunities for folks to get involved. Example close to home is the Great Whale Count, which we just hosted yesterday, where we invite members of the community to come out and help us do our annual community outreach and community science event of counting whales from the coast. It connects people with humpback whales. It connects them with the long-term community science project and gets them engaged in some form of conservation. And these community science projects are available throughout the world. And so if that's something you're interested in, you can certainly look up community science projects, or historically they've been called citizen science projects, in whatever area you're living. And there's opportunities, of course, to get involved with that. If you're on the coast, you're going to have a better chance of finding something for whales and dolphins than, of course, landlocked states or countries.
I think it's really cool that you're pretty spread out throughout the entire Pacific, which makes sense and is great. And when I saw on your website as well, there was a couple things in there that I was like, I honestly never thought of that, which was, to donate money as a way to adopt a marine mammal or to name a marine mammal. I was like, I've seen that for, pandas and elephants and such. And I was like, I never thought about a whale. That's really cool. So for any of those who's listening, you can go on there and adopt a false killer whale, humpback, bottlenose, or name one, which is pretty exciting. I was like, that's such a cool thing and a great gift as well for someone.
The adoption program is a bit unique here in that we will actually track that individual over time for you. And so these are symbolic adoptions. We're not shipping you dolphins, but we are tracking them. These are individuals that are in our catalog. They have long sighting histories. They're usually well known among the researchers. And every quarter, you'll get an update of if your individual adoption animal was sighted or not. And so, it's a lifetime adoption that could potentially provide you insights into whichever animal you adopt for quite some time. So definitely worth checking out. And then if you want to name something in honor of something or for yourself, go ahead and do that again. That is all based on our research catalogs here. So you are selecting unnamed animals. And on the research side, we give them a number. We don't name them. It's just easier to track that way. And so this is a name that then lives with that individual and becomes part of the legacy of the catalogs here at Pacific Whale Foundation.
Have you seen any funny names anyone's named, like Snuffly, like Good Snuffles, or, anything funny like that? I'm curious.
I do know there's some odd ones that come through. However, on the spot, it's not coming to mind. I do know we've had a wide range of sentimental to some pretty hilarious.
So if somebody names a whale, then do you guys in your research? I mean, that name comes up. That's the name that?
Yeah. So the way it works is we provide an individual that we know is going to be hopefully sighted again, meaning it's not a once-off sighting. So it has to have at least 3 sightings in our historic catalog. It's not been named before. And then we send that off to the adoption program, which is another department from here. And then once it's named, they give that name back to us. And then we just associate that name with that individual as kind of like a secondary identification feature.
Really cool. That's nice. Well, listen, I remember from my childhood, right? Save the whales was always such a huge and important phrase, right? And now all these years later, I'm so happy that you have joined us today. And I really appreciate, I'm speaking on behalf of all of our listeners. I'm sure all of the work that you guys are doing. I know it's important, and it's, again, not just to the actual dolphins and whales, but really to everybody and to the whole planet. So, so thanks again for joining us. I'm going to let Anastasia take us home here, but I just wanted to say that before she wrapped things up for us. And again, thank you personally, Jens, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Good Viral podcast and being part of a conversation. If you are inspired by this episode, go to our website at goodviral.org, where you can find resources and listings from the episode to continue good efforts.
Like, comment, and share this episode to any or all of your social media channels. It's really easy to take a small action, and maybe you'll inspire a big result.
When good goes viral, the world gets better.